Okay, I'm ready.
Live in a couple of seconds.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me and see the presentation I have here. I am just going to do a very quick presentation and then we're going to follow it up with a Q&A. So you should see a little bubble box on your screen. If you have any questions, please type them in there and then I will answer them at the end. So yeah, welcome. Today's session is on window exposure. So it's one of our, obviously one of our criteria in order to pass your trial is to get the window exposures correct. It's also one of the main mistakes that we see over and over again from photographers. And it's also somewhat of a client complaint as well. So yeah, so super important to get the window exposure right. So that's what we're going to get into today. So what we're going to talk about are the requirements. I've broken it down here for you. So we have the ISO, which should be between 200 and 400. So generally I say with the ISO to always opt for 400 and to sort of fix your ISO at 400 for all of your images, interior and exterior. However, there are going to be certain cases where you're going to need to lower the ISO. Most of the time when you lower it to 200, that should be fine. And in those cases, it will be when the flash is very powerful or maybe on particularly sunny days, you're going to need to lower the ISO to avoid overexposure for other bits of the image. So the other thing is basically when you expose, when you're doing your settings and taking the image in a room, whether it's light or dark, the general rule, this might not apply to every single case, but the general rule is to boost the flash. That will really help the window exposure because what happens is you have light coming in from the window. And then so when you expose, it will make the room look darker. So the general rule is to boost the flash, but this is especially true on sunnier days when there's a lot of sun or the sun is really bright, then you're going to need to compensate that with the flash. So yeah, the next thing is, and this is crucial, this is something that a lot of people either don't do or think that they can change their settings to get away with not using a tripod, but always use a tripod. Especially when you are exposing for the window, you're going to need to adjust your shutter speed. So that is absolutely crucial to use a tripod when you're adjusting your shutter speed. If you're going for longer shutter speeds, especially, having a tripod is pretty much non-negotiable. It will also help you with your ISO. It will also help you with your composition. Yeah, it will help you with everything. So definitely use a tripod. The next thing is the basic rule and what we say in order to help make sure that the windows are exposed properly is you want to expose for the windows rather than the entire room. So what this means is generally when you are exposing for an image, people tend to expose for the entire room, and that is actually what creates the overexposed windows because the camera will not understand what you're asking it to do if it's getting a lot of light from the windows. And it's not going to want to make the rest of the room look darker. So it will automatically overexpose the windows and expose everything else properly. So what we recommend is to first expose for your windows, which generally means that the room will then look very dark. But once you expose for your windows, then and only then that's when you add on the flash, and that flash will really fill everything out and really help expose the entire room, basically. And then the last thing is the f-stop. We generally, our general guide is to shoot on, or not general guide, general requirement is to shoot on from f7 to f9 anyways, but this is especially important for exposing windows properly. So these are the 5 requirements. I've broken it down into 5. Hopefully this will be simple for you to remember and understand. Perhaps make a checklist for you to check over when you are noticing that you're having difficulty with exposing windows, or even if you're maybe a bit newer to property photography, this is a great little checklist. So ISO from 200 to 400. Again, generally recommend 400, but you will have to go down to 200 on sunnier days. Boosting the flash, especially on sunnier days, will definitely help to compensate for the light coming in from the window. Always use a tripod. Expose for the window rather than the room, and shoot between f7 and f9. So here I have an example of an overexposed window. So here you can see that the curtains are sheer curtains. So I'm using this example because this is especially difficult for people when there are sheer curtains, because you will lose information and blur things out from the windows. But this is a really good example of blown out windows. So what we generally say is, what is a blown out window? It's when you can't see outside. With the sheer curtains, you won't be able to see outside anyway. So this is why I wanted to show this particular example. Here you can see that there's no information there, and it looks, and it's just completely blown out, and it looks like it just is very, very bright and overexposed, basically. So this is properly exposed windows. So here you can see the curtains are nice and sheer. You can see there is some information lost, but that's fine. You can see the detail in the curtains. You aren't expected to see outside, especially when there are sheer curtains like that. But this was a particularly sunny day, so yeah, so that's absolutely fine. So the windows are exposed correctly here, where you can see the detail in the curtains, and you can see between the 2 images that the exact same settings or exposure was used, but you can see that in the second one, you can see more detail in the window. It looks a lot less bright coming from the window. It's much less distracting for the image on a whole. So the image to the left is the overexposed image, and with windows like that are completely overexposed, it can be quite distracting to the eye, and then you can tend to the viewer will tend to look at that rather than the image. So you can see on the left here that on the right here that the image is much more balanced, much nicer to the eye, and you can see the detail in the curtains, which is the most important thing for these particular curtain images. Right, so again, just to summarize, these are the 5 requirements to remember. If you follow these 5 things, I can basically guarantee that you will get a perfectly exposed window with the rest of the room exposed properly as well. So now I'm going to open it up to a Q&A. So feel free to write your questions in the bubble and I shall have a look and read them. Let me just close this here. Okay. Hi everyone, sorry, I am just trying to open the chat here. Let me just see if I have any questions. Right, so first question, should we use bracketing settings to create HDR images at all? Really good question. So there are two types of lighting used in property photography. One of them is HDR or bracketing, and the other is the flash method. So basically, we do not use the HDR method, we use the flash method. So to answer your question, in order to expose the windows properly, we use flash. So we do not use HDR at all. So thank you for that. Next question, what height should the camera ideally be? So we say a height of 4.5 feet. So a general rule, obviously the best thing to do in that case would be to measure your tripod and make sure that the lens is at 4.5 feet. Also, if you are in a kitchen, it is basically just above the countertop, so you're able to see the countertops. Hi, would you turn interior lights on or leave off? Very, very good question. So interior lights, we always have on. As many lights as you can have on, the better. There are a couple of reasons for this. One of them is obviously it will help your general lighting. It will make the images brighter. So if you have a lamp in the corner or a ceiling light, it will brighten up those areas. So when you're using the flash, that's one source of light. So as many sources of light as you have will work for you. But the main reason really is because it generally looks a lot more professional to have all of the lights on. And then someone else said, what is the best way to get correct exposure for window? Well, hopefully I've answered that question. So you first want to expose for the window. So leave your flash off, adjust your settings so that you can expose for the window first and you can see out of the window. Or again, if there are curtains sheer curtains that you can see the details in the curtains. And then only when you have that, that's when you add the flash. Hi there, just a few general questions. For shutter speed, is there a preferred speed? And is there a better setting to have for white balance and exposure? So for shutter speed, that's a good question. So for property photography, generally speaking, shutter speed is slower than most types of other photography. So the faster the shutter speed, the darker the image, basically. And we want to be using as much light as possible. So if you have a tripod, you're welcome to slow down the shutter speed. The only thing that I would look out for is making sure that lights don't bleed. So when you have a slower shutter speed, it's much easier to almost get too much light into the image. So the general rule is anything between 1/60th and 1/2, I believe. So anything in between there. Again, you're just going to have to assess based on the amount of light that you have in the room, but anything between 1/60th and 1/2. And as for the white balance, there is not necessarily a better setting. Usually, some people will have it on auto. There's a lot of issues, as I'm sure you're aware of, having the white balance on auto. So, and then a lot of people will, before they go out into the shoot in the mornings, they will take a gray card or a white card and then adjust their white balance every single morning before they go out. Or some people, if it is a really bright sunny day, will have it on sunny. Or if it's really dark inside, they'll adjust it to tungsten lighting. So there isn't necessarily, unfortunately, I don't have an answer on the white balance, but I would say you would need to adjust it as you go, preferably based on what kind of day it is. Do we need to do any editing before sending images to you? Great question. No, we do not require any editing at all. We actually recommend that you do not do any editing. We have an entire post-production team who does all of the editing for you. So yeah, so unedited images, please. Is the flash direct or bounced? So the flash should be pointed up towards the ceiling or on a 45-degree angle behind you. It should never be pointed directly into the room, because that will create, it will be very harsh and it will create shadows. Is a 28mm lens on a full frame wide enough? No, it is not. On a full frame, we require a 16mm focal length that has very little leeway on either side. The maximum we can go is 14mm, or the widest we can go is 14mm to 18mm, but ideally 16mm on a full frame camera, please. When you have sheer curtains, would you recommend opening them to get an outside view? That's a good question as well. So generally, we don't recommend touching anything at all. It depends on the vendor and it depends on the agent, and it also depends on the property. So, and it also, to be totally honest, it depends on the view that's outside. So sometimes having that sheer curtain will really help because there might be bins or something outside that basically the view is not very nice. But we would always recommend, if they have the sheer curtains, when you go to photograph the property, please leave them there. The owner generally will have that there for a reason. So potentially they don't like the view or they think it looks nicer. If you feel, if it does have a really nice view behind it, you can ask the vendor to open. But the good thing about the sheer curtains is you get the light without necessarily getting the view if it isn't a nice view. So yeah. Okay. I'm sitting here with a black screen that says live event hasn't started yet. Is that correct? Oh. John is replying to you. Hopefully you can see me. Hopefully you can see me, Jenny. Can HDR be used when shooting externally to help with sky exposure? No. So we do not recommend HDR at all at the moment. Our method is again flash. I'd be curious to know if you want to message again as to what you mean by helping with sky exposure, because if you are exposing the image correctly, then your sky should be fine. If you mean that it's overexposed, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I wouldn't worry too much about that because the sky is replaced. Our post-production team actually replaces all of the skies to make it a nice, beautiful blue sky. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, to be honest. Okay, I usually set exposure right for the windows and took the first shoot without flash to see if the view outside is nice and clear. Then I had the flash pointing to behind me. It brightens up the room nicely, but the windows often become a bit faded, opaque because of the reflections from the wall. I'm then playing with flash directions, but the result is not always perfect. What is your suggestion to prevent faded glasses when using flash? So I would be curious, I know you're pointing it behind you. I would be curious to know what your settings are, what your ISO is. If that's the case, then potentially lower the ISO. As I was saying before, there are cases where you're going to need to lower the ISO. And are you using a tripod? If you use a tripod and lower the ISO, then that will really help with not having to boost the flash so much. So from what you're saying, it sounds to me like the flash is a bit high, which is causing the reflections, which is quite a common thing. So I would say in this case, it's hard to see without seeing the image, but I would say in this case, lower the flash, lower the ISO, and make sure that you're using a tripod. Do we shoot in RAW format? Good question. Our portal only accepts JPEG, so it's completely up to you how you want to shoot. If you want to shoot in RAW, that's fine, but we actually recommend to shoot in JPEG. If you shoot in JPEG, it makes it a lot easier to upload because you don't need to convert anything. So I know a lot of people will are used to shooting in RAW and will want to shoot in RAW, but we do all the post-production and we only accept JPEG images anyway, so all of the editing is done on JPEGs. Size and type of images, i.e. RAW, JPEG. Yeah, so the size of the images need to be between 3 megabytes to 8 megabytes. And they need to be JPEGs. Do we have to draw floor plans or can we use computer software? Right, so anything to do with floor plans, we will answer in another session. Hopefully we will have these quite regularly. We'll have some floor plan sessions and some photography sessions a few times a week, but just to answer this quickly for you, we would always recommend to draw it yourself on a graph paper. Okay, image quality and size, I answered that. Blinds on a tilt or totally open. I would generally suggest open. Depends on the vendor. Some vendors will request that the blinds are on a tilt so you can see the blinds properly. But the general rule is as much light as you can get and as much view as you can get out of the window, basically. What size wide angle lens for cropped sensor cameras? So for cropped sensors, we require a 10mm focal length. It equates to a 35mm, 16 millimeters in a 35mm length. So if you look at the metadata in your images, you should be able to see, it will say whether it equates to 16 millimeters, but generally all cropped cameras have a crop sensor 1.6. Which means that it's a 10mm focal length. We have some slight leeway on here again, same as full frame camera, so we can go either way by 1mm on crop frame, so 9mm or 11mm. What other camera settings should be the height of the camera? Yeah, so good. Height of the camera when shooting outside. So good question again. We would recommend the same height as interior, which is 4.5 feet. Okay, thanks for elaborating on the question earlier, Nick. I was just thinking about when shooting into the light that HDR might have helped to bring some detail into the sky. Yes, you are right. HDR will generally help with bringing detail in. However, using exterior photos do not have flash used, so I wouldn't worry too much about the detail in the sky because they are replaced anyways. Right, okay, so does anybody else have any more questions before we go? I'm just looking at the see if I've missed any. I don't think I have. Okay, great. Well, hopefully that was all useful for you all. We are planning on doing these workshops quite regularly, so we'll have different themes and different topics every workshop, but we will be in touch to let you know when the next one is. And yeah, thank you so much for joining, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye, everyone.